August 3rd, 1944. Outside Mortagne, France. The 75mm gun wouldn't fire. Inside the Sherman tank, Corporal Thomas Gus Gustafson stared at the shell wedged halfway into the breach, his hands black with oil and smoke. Through the steel walls, he could hear them, the low, grinding rumble of Panzer IV engines closing through the fog. Less than 300 meters and getting closer. His heart hammered against his ribs. The commander was shouting for status. The gunner was swearing. And Gus knew with absolute certainty that if he didn't fix this gun in the next 30 seconds, all 5 of them were dead. Before we dive deeper, quick question. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments. It's incredible to think that right now people from across the globe, Tokyo, Detroit, Cairo, Oslo, are connected by these forgotten stories. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button. History like this deserves to be remembered. Now back to that jammed gun. Gus didn't think about medals. He didn't think about glory. He thought about his kid brother back in Duluth, Minnesota, about the machine shop his father ran, and about something the old man had told him 100 times. When the machine fails, you fix it. You don't wait. You don't freeze. You fix it. So without asking permission, without waiting for orders, Gus grabbed the small utility light clipped to his chest, shoved his helmet back, and leaned into the breach. His fingers found the misalignment, a tiny jam, barely visible, caused by shrapnel from a near miss minutes earlier. He reached into his tool pouch, pulled out a flathead screwdriver, and wedged it between the shell casing and the breech lock. 3 seconds. 5. 10. Then, click. The shell snapped into place. The breech slammed shut. "Ready," he shouted. The gunner didn't hesitate. The turret swung left. 2 shots rang out in quick succession, splitting the morning fog. By the time the smoke cleared, both Panzers were burning, and Gus sat back stunned, his hands trembling, realizing that he had just saved 5 lives, not with superior firepower, not with better armor, but with a screwdriver and a decision no one else had time to make. Thomas Gustafson was never supposed to be a hero. Born in 1922 in the cold lakeside town of Duluth, he was the middle son of a Swedish immigrant machinist and a hospital night nurse. Life was simple, honest, mechanical. Everything in Gus's world made sense if you followed the gears, the bolts, the blueprints. By age 10, he had grease under his fingernails. By 16, he could disassemble a carburetor blindfolded. School bored him. Reading didn't stick, but fixing things, that was second nature. When the war came, Gus didn't rush to enlist like some of the boys in town. He figured the draft would come for him eventually. And it did. Summer of 1942, they sent him south to basic training in Georgia, where the humidity felt like drowning and the sergeants yelled in accents he could barely understand. But Gus adapted. He was quiet, observant, and fast with his hands. When the Army needed loaders for Sherman tank crews, they picked him. He never asked to be in armor. He never dreamed of tanks. But that's where they put him. 743rd Tank Battalion, later attached to the 4th Armored Division, headed for Europe. The M4 Sherman was a machine built on compromise. It wasn't the best tank in the war, not by a long shot. German tankers called it a Tommy Cooker or a Ronson lighter, after the cigarette lighter advertised to light on the first strike. The Sherman's 75mm gun was reliable, but underpowered against heavy German armor. Its steel plating was barely thick enough to deflect standard rounds. A Panther could punch through it from a kilometer away. A Tiger could kill it from a mile. But the United States didn't need one perfect tank, it needed tens of thousands. And by 1944, nearly 50,000 Shermans had rolled off assembly lines in Detroit, Cleveland, and Philadelphia. What they lacked in brute force, they made up for in numbers, speed, and the quality of their crews. And inside those crews were men like Gus, mechanics in uniform, soldiers who understood how things worked, and more importantly, how to fix them when they broke. By early August, the Normandy breakout was in full swing. After weeks of grinding combat through the hedgerows, American forces were finally pushing inland across France. But the Germans weren't finished. Hitler ordered a massive counterattack near Mortagne, a quiet French town nestled among rolling hills and ancient stone walls. Operation Lutic, they called it, a desperate gamble to cut off the American advance and retake the vital crossroads at Avranches. Panzer divisions were moving in from the east. American armor units scrambled to hold the line. Gus and his crew, 5 men crammed into 25 tons of riveted steel, were ordered to support infantry units pushing through the outskirts of Mortain. Their tank, nicknamed Lucky Striker, had already survived 2 near misses that week. The men slept in their gear. They ate cold rations in the shadow of the turret. They joked when they could, but the tension never left. Every morning was a question mark. Inside the Sherman, Gus was the loader. His job was simple in theory. Grab the right shell, slam it into the gun's open breech, close the mechanism, and shout, "Up!" But in practice, it was a brutal ballet of timing, muscle memory, and reflex. The 75-meter rounds weighed nearly 15 pounds each. When the gun fired, it recoiled backward with bone-crushing force. Smoke and cordite filled the turret. The noise was deafening, and through it all, Gus had to keep moving, grabbing, loading, locking over and over until either the enemy was dead or they were. Loaders didn't get medals. They didn't make headlines. They weren't in command. They didn't pull the trigger. But without them, nothing happened. The tank was just a steel coffin waiting to burn. What no one knew, not even Gus, was that one foggy morning near Mortain, this quiet mechanic from Minnesota would face a moment that would test everything he believed in, not just his skill, not just his courage, but the instinct that had guided him since childhood. When the machine breaks, you fix it, or you die trying. August 3rd, 05:30 hours. The sun was a pale suggestion behind the clouds. Fog clung to the hedgerows like wet wool, cutting visibility to less than 200 yards. Lucky Striker growled forward along a narrow dirt lane, leading a column of 2 other Shermans and a squad of armored infantry riding in half-tracks. Their objective was straightforward on paper: provide covering fire for an infantry advance. But nothing in Normandy was straightforward. The roads were too tight. The hedgerows turned every field into a maze. And that morning the countryside was silent. Too silent. No birds, no wind. Just the low rumble of diesel engines and the crunch of treads on gravel. Then it started. A sharp crack split the air. A shell landed just ahead of the lead tank, sending up a fountain of dirt and shrapnel. The column halted. A second explosion followed, closer this time. German artillery was ranging in. They were being bracketed. Sergeant Ray Burke, the tank commander, barked orders into the radio. "Move forward, push through." The tanks accelerated, bursting through a gap in the hedgerow into an open field, flat, wide, and utterly exposed. Gus felt his stomach drop. This wasn't cover. This was a killing zone. As the Shermans raced across the field, a hidden anti-tank round struck the middle tank. It erupted in flames, the turret lifting off like a kicked can. Gus caught a glimpse of a crewman trying to escape, but the fire was too fast. The remaining 2 tanks accelerated, firing blindly into the tree line. Then Lucky Striker took a hard hit to its left side. The blast rocked the hull. The crew was thrown sideways. Instruments shattered. The lights flickered. The whole tank groaned like it might come apart at the welds. "Status," Burke shouted. "No breach," Gus called back. "But something's wrong." The gunner, Private Jack Russell, tried to rotate the turret left, but it stuck halfway. The traverse system was damaged. Worse, when Gus went to load the next shell, he felt resistance. The round wouldn't slide all the way in. "Hold on," he said. "Breech is jammed." Burke swore. "How bad?" "Don't know. Feels mechanical. Maybe heat expansion. I need a second." But there was no second. Through the fog and smoke, 2 dark shapes emerged from the trees. Panzer IVs. Not Tigers, thank God, but fast, deadly, and crewed by veterans who knew how to kill. They moved in formation, flanking the Sherman from the left, exploiting the broken terrain. "Turret stuck, gun won't fire," Russell reported. "Back it up, reverse now," Burke ordered. The driver slammed the tank into reverse, but the engine coughed. The left tread housing had taken secondary damage. They were still mobile, but barely. The Sherman shuddered as it backed into a shallow ditch, just enough to buy a few seconds. Not enough. The Panzers were closing. 200 meters. 150. Burke's voice went flat. We're dead. Inside the tank, time collapsed. The temperature spiked. Gus could hear his own heartbeat faster than the engine. He stared at the jammed shell, then at the approaching enemy tanks. He knew what came next. Without a main gun, the Sherman was a coffin on treads. The Germans wouldn't hesitate. One shot, and it would be over, either clean or burning. Gus had maybe 20 seconds. He didn't think. He moved. He grabbed the small flashlight from his chest pocket, flicked it on, and pointed it into the breach. His other hand reached for the tool pouch under the seat. From inside, he pulled a flathead screwdriver, old, greasy, just long enough. He clamped the flashlight between his teeth and leaned in, his hands now inside the gun housing, centimeters from live ammunition. He could see the problem. The shell's base had caught on a fragment of metal, a tiny burr on the guide rail knocked loose by the impact. It had pushed the round just far enough off axis to lock the breech open. "Gus, what are you doing?" Russell hissed. "Fixing it," Gus growled, voice muffled by the flashlight. The Panzer engines roared louder. 100 meters. He wedged the screwdriver between the shell and the inner track, twisting, leveraging, forcing the round down and forward. Sweat poured into his eyes. His gloves were soaked. His hands trembled. But his mind was calm, mechanical, focused. Turn, push, test, again, 75 meters. The screwdriver slipped, slicing into his knuckle. Blood smeared the shell casing. He didn't stop. 50 meters. A final twist. A metallic clunk. The shell slid home. The breech slammed shut. "Loaded!" he shouted. The gunner swung the turret as far as it would go. The Traverse motor groaned but obeyed. The crosshairs found the lead Panzer's side profile. 40 meters out, exposed, vulnerable. "Fire!" The tank shook as the 75mm cannon roared. The round struck low on the Panzer's side skirt, piercing the armor and igniting the ammunition. A fireball erupted, lifting the turret slightly before it collapsed in a cloud of black smoke. Before anyone could breathe, Gus had already loaded the second round. His hands were automatic now. Grab, load, lock. Russell adjusted for the second Panzer, now reacting too late, trying to reverse. It exposed its flank. "Fire!" The second shot rang out. Direct hit just below the turret ring. Sparks flew. Then silence. Then a dull whump as the crew compartment detonated. Both tanks were down. Inside the Sherman, no one spoke for several seconds. Smoke from their own gun filled the turret. Ears rang from the concussion. Burke finally broke the silence. "Holy hell." Gus sat back against the ammo rack, hands bleeding, heart pounding, body shaking. He looked down at the screwdriver still warm in his palm. He had just turned a death sentence into survival, with a flashlight, a tool, and 30 seconds of nerve. Outside, the two burning wrecks of German armor marked the impossible. A Sherman, dead in the field, had taken out two Panzer IVs in under a minute. Inside, no one looked at Gus the same way again. The smoke cleared by mid-morning. Reinforcements secured the area. Mortain remained in American hands. Operation Ludic failed within days, becoming one more desperate German gamble that collapsed under Allied firepower and logistics. But for Gus Gustafsson, that morning never faded. He didn't talk about it, not during the war, not much afterward. His name never appeared in newspapers. The field citation Burke submitted was buried under piles of paperwork in a division headquarters that moved 2 days later. There was no medal, no ceremony. Just a handwritten note in a file that no one ever read. After the war, Gus returned to Duluth. He married a local nurse, took over his father's machine shop, raised 2 boys. Every Sunday he sharpened his tools in silence, just like before the war. People called him quiet, steady, dependable. It wasn't until decades later, when his grandson interviewed him for a school history project, that the story came out. Gus had been reluctant. He had to be asked 3 times. "I was just a loader," he said. The boy blinked. "But you saved everyone." Gus looked down at his hands, still calloused, still strong. Then he said something he'd never told anyone, not even his sons. You don't get to pick your moment. Sometimes the machine breaks. Sometimes everything's jammed and no one knows what to do. You can freeze or you can grab a tool and fix it. That's it. That's the whole difference between dying and living. The boy wrote it down word for word. Years later, after Gus passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 83, that same grandson stood at a veteran ceremony and read his grandfather's story aloud. It wasn't just about tanks or war. It was about instinct, courage, and the split-second decisions that define a life. In a world that celebrates commanders and heroes, one story stood out, that of a single mechanic-turned-loader who, in the space of 1 minute, destroyed 2 enemy tanks with a flashlight, a screwdriver, and the will to try. The tank was named Lucky Striker, but luck had nothing to do with it. I never saw combat. I never heard a shell scream overhead, or felt the steel walls of a tank shake from a near miss. I never had 30 seconds to decide whether 5 people lived or died. But every time I return to this story, Gus's story, I realize that maybe that's why it matters so much. Because courage doesn't always wear medals, it doesn't always stand on podiums. Sometimes it sits low in the shadows, hunched over a jammed gun in a smoke-filled tank, holding nothing but a flashlight, a screwdriver, and the absolute refusal to give up. What gets me is how small the moment was. No dramatic music, no orders from above. Just one man, faced with failure, choosing to act anyway. And what strikes me most is this. He never called it bravery. He never used words like hero or miracle. To him, it was just something that had to be done, because the machine was broken and someone had to fix it. That someone was Gus, and I think that's what I carry with me. The idea that in our own lives far from the battlefield, we all face moments where something jams, where the system breaks, where everyone else freezes, and we're left holding the metaphorical tool in our hands. It's what we do next that defines us. We don't all get tanks named after us. We don't all save lives. But sometimes, choosing not to freeze, choosing to try, however small the act, is the victory. Gus Gustafson didn't change the war, but for 5 men in a field outside Mortain, he changed everything. And for me, he changed what I thought courage looked like. What shocked you most about this story? The screwdriver? The silence afterward? Or the fact that you've never heard it before? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more hidden stories from World War II.